All right, this is gonna be unscripted. This is um this is gonna be a list of every Washington State County high point from easiest to hardest. Yeah, easiest to hardest. That's right. I got that. Um, this list is assuming that you own a car because a lot of these peaks you can actually drive to the top of. And if you didn't have a car, that would make them a lot harder than they normally would be. All right, let's get to it. Our 38th hardest or easiest is going to be the Spokane County high point, Mount Spokane at 5,800 feet. Immediately, something's very peculiar about this one. It is on a ski resort. It is a ski resort. It is in fact the Mount Spokane ski resort, named after this mountain, and you can just drive to the top of it. It's not a dirt road. It's not a forest road. It is a paved road to the top. Only county high point in Washington State that's like this. Okay, next on this list, next easiest is the Island County High Point, which is an unnamed coordinate on Camano Island in Washington State in the Puget Sound. The hardest thing about this is that it lies in just some person's backyard. It lies in this person's backyard, and this person's really hard to contact. I haven't been able to find his phone number on the internet anywhere, even though this point is of interest to peak baggers. I don't know like how to contact this guy, so that's like kind of tough. The only reason why this isn't further down the list because of it is because it is probably a 2-minute walk. You drive along this road, and then you drive down this road to the end, and then it's maybe 20 feet of walking through some bushes, and then you're there. It's physically the least strenuous by far on this list, not counting ones that you just drive to. But yeah, this one's pretty no nonsense. I'm sure you can just knock on this guy's door and ask if you can bag it. I'm sure he's used to that. Number 36. This is the Douglas County High Point. Badger Mountain. Not really much of a mountain, it's more of a flat plateau on a road. You kind of just drive on this road and you walk like 20 feet maybe, and you're there at the quote unquote mountain. It's just a point on a plateau. I wouldn't really consider that a mountain. But yeah, that's the Douglas County High Point. It is really no issue at all. Next up is the Adams County High Point. There's a trend with a bunch of different peaks in Eastern Washington, I mean, Eastern. The majority of them are just coordinates in wheat field. And the hardest part about getting to them is just like finding the exact coordinates to stand out, because there's no way to tell that you're actually standing there unless you have a GPS on. But if you do, this is just easy. Nothing stopping you from going to the Adams County High Point, which is why it's the 36th easiest. By easiest, I mean hardest. 36th hardest high point. Next, we have Grant County. It's actually kind of on a hill this time. Good job, good job, Eastern Washington. I'm proud. You did it. It's still like you're just kind of walking through grass, like kind of up a hill. This one's on private land, but I haven't really been able to find like info on like who it's owned by. I really doubt anyone's going to like shoot you for standing on this, but okay, this one's Franklin County. This is the Franklin County High Point. Yet another Eastern Washington high point that's just kind of a coordinate in the field, in the wheat fields. This one is unique. Franklin County High Point is unique because information about contacting the landowner is actually everywhere. This guy's name is Doug. The person who lives in this house is Doug, and you can find his phone number all over peakbagger.com, all over the trip reports. He actually really likes it when people come out here, but only if they ask first. There's a few trip reports of him like threatening people with a rifle for trespassing on his land by trying to climb this without his permission. Pretty much the hardest part is talking with Doug over here and walking like a mile or two through some wheat fields. Again, Eastern Washington, nothing really over here. It's just kind of flat. Next up on the list is the Asotin County High Point, Ray Ridge, and you can just drive to the top. It's another one you can drive to the top. I consider it harder than these, because it's kind of easy to get lost on your car through these back roads. There's not very much reliable information about these hills. These are called the Blue Hills, I believe, the Blue Mountains in Washington State. There's not much reliable information on the internet. It's kind of hard to find like maps of this. I can totally imagine someone getting lost on these back roads trying to climb up to here in their car. But if you know what you're doing, you know what you're doing, and it's easy. Kitsap County High Point, Gold Mountain. This one actually has a name. This one has a name. Gold Mountain. The other ones didn't have names. They were just called Franklin County High Point, etc. This one has a name. This is Gold Mountain. I have climbed this one before. I did it in under 4 hours. It is not that hard at all. It's 8 miles round trip, around 1,000 feet of gain. I'd say the hardest part about this is finding out which of these peaks, because you can see in the data here, the 3D model of the mountain, there's a bunch of like sub peaks. It's kind of hard to determine when you're there which one's actually the highest. I was sure to stand on this one, so I did make it. But yeah, this is the first one that's actually like a real hike. It's a real hike. It's 1,000 feet of gain. It is not hard at all. You're not going to get lost. It is just kind of just a road. Really hard to get lost up here. Yeah, it's pretty no-brainer. It's easy. Pretty easy. Next up is Mount Constitution in the San Juan Islands. This one is very similar to the Kitsap County High Point, Gold Mountain, except it's way harder. It's just kind of way harder, way more difficult. For one, it's about twice the length and about twice the height. This one's 2,000 feet, 2,400 feet, and about like. But the trail up here is so popular, and you're not going to get lost on these trails because it's so popular. This is the highest point in the San Juan Islands. Yeah, this one's just a nice little day hike. Nothing too insane, but it is very rewarding for what it is. Look at this. This is great. Next up, we got Whitman County. We got the Whitman County High Point, Tekoa Mountain. This one's called Tekoa Mountain. It's on private land again, like most peaks are in eastern Washington. It's a simple road walk for 6 miles round trip, just kind of up this hill. And at the peak, there's some radio towers. There's not much else to say. It's not that interesting. Next up, we got the Wahkiakum County High Point. I think that's how you say it. This is Huckleberry Ridge, which is a very generic name for like a ridge. There's like 5 other Huckleberry Ridges in Washington State alone. I digress. Anyways, the main difficulty from this is that you're only legally able to climb it for the first 2 months in November. It is a really insanely thin time window to legally summit this. And it's during hunting season. It's only open because it's hunting season during the first 2 weeks in November, so that's the only reason why you're able to climb this. It's 10 miles round trip and about 1,000 feet of elevation gain. And the hardest part is being able to find the time in those 2 weeks in November. You have to plan ahead really far. But yeah, it's pretty easy. Hardest part is just the time window. Next is Lincoln County High Point. This one has a really strange name. Lilienthal Mountain, 3,500 feet. It's on private land again. Of course, it's in eastern Washington. So you need to ask the landowners permission to summit this. And the landowners are really hard to contact. I haven't really been able to find much reliable information on that. It's 3 miles round trip up dirt roads, but it would be way lower on the list if it wasn't like so ambiguous on like how to contact the people in order to legally climb this. But yeah, it's not that strenuous. Okay, this is Columbia County High Point, Oregon Butte, 6,300 feet. It's a 5.5 mile round trip up actual real hiking trails, not like forest roads anymore. This is hiking trails. It's fairly strenuous from the trailhead to the summit. It's 5.5 miles, but you gain about like 3,000. It's 5.5 miles round trip. That's front and then back, so it's pretty steep. But it's short and you can do it in like a few hours. Nothing too crazy. This is Klickitat County, Indian Rock. It's another flat plateau peak with no prominence. A road leads to the top, but the road is very poorly maintained. So the only way you're able to drive up this is if you have like a like a 4x4 or something. You can't bring your Honda Civic like up this road. But you can always walk it, and it's like a pretty easy walk. Although it is a very remote location and it's pretty hard to get to. Directions are pretty vague on how to get to this. Alright, next up we got Thurston County High Point, Quiemuth Peak. It's a pretty average steep forested hill walk up forest roads. Pretty steep, but nothing hard. Nothing too like terribly complicated. Until you get around like a few hundred feet below the summit right here. The road starts becoming very poorly maintained around this point. You're going to start having to walk over a ton of logs, and the last few hundred feet before the summit, the trail just kind of goes away. The road just kind of goes away. There's no road that leads to the very top of this mountain, Quiemuth Peak. You have to just walk through these trees, straight up, without a trail. And from the peak, there's no view. There's nothing. Quiemuth Peak has a 1 star on Google, which I thought was really funny. Everyone really seems to hate this one, which I found kind of hilarious. Everyone hates this. Alright, next we got Benton County. It's the Rattlesnake Hills Lookout. It is very brutally windy. Every trip report I found mentioned that it wasn't a very fun walk at all because of how horribly windy it is on this ridge. Apparently cars aren't allowed. You're not allowed to bring your car up here. I don't see how you can't bike. I feel like you can ride a bike to this point, and that would make it way easier. I didn't see any of the trip reports do that though, so I feel like that might not be possible. But I don't see how you couldn't. It's just a dirt trail, pretty easy. Very long too, 10 miles round trip, just straight. Not very much scenery to offer either. The Pacific County High Point. It's 20 miles round trip, up forest roads. By the way, this has no name. This is it's in the Walla Hills of Washington, and it's the tallest peak of the Walla Hill, like by a pretty decent margin too. But it doesn't have a name for some reason. I don't really know why. It's pretty prominent. I don't see why it doesn't have a name. But yeah, it's 20 miles round trip just on forest roads from the nearest road. This entire peak is on it's federal logging property. It's all owned by logging corporations, and you need their permission. So if you don't have their permission, you're going to be trespassing up this. But yeah, a ton of people rode their bike up to this because it's all wide, windy forest roads. Very nice for biking. It's straight up a hill for 10 miles, but I imagine going back down would be very fun. Next, we have Garfield County High Point in the Blue Mountains. Diamond Peak, very southeast corner of Washington. None of the peak bagger trip reports give very reliable info on how to climb this, but there are nearby trailheads, so I imagine it's not that difficult. The aura of like not knowing what you're doing, I imagine would be pretty difficult. Makes this pretty like unnerving to do. You have no idea where you're going. This one is the Clallam County High Point, a Gray Wolf Ridge, 7,200. It's the first one in the Olympic Mountains. From the trailhead, it is over 5,000 feet of climbing. And over 2,000 feet of those climbing is just on this ridge going up and down, up loose, chattery scree for miles. It's pretty strenuous, but it's nothing, it's absolutely nothing you can't do if you're not already fit. It's just a walk up. You can just bring hiking shoes and water. It's nothing technical about this at all. Still very strenuous though. 5,000 feet of climbing, Jesus, in one day. It's pretty tough. Next up, we got the Ferry County High Point, Copper Butte. It's a pretty normal walk up, just a hill. Nothing too crazy. It is very, very remote. It is extremely remote and quite difficult to get to if you don't have a map on you. Next is Walla County High Point. This one is horribly documented. This one is called Lewis Peak, and the most recent trip report on the internet that I can find is from 2007, which basically means I have no idea how to get up here. The one thing that's making this like not hit the top 10 just because of how like obscure it is, it's because you can just drive to the top. Still though, there's no reliable trip reports, no reliable information about Lewis Peak at all on the internet, really. Any recent information, at least. So yeah, this one's rough. Next is the Clark County High Point, which is Sturgeon Rock West Ridge. It is the side of a rock. on the border with Klickitat County. It is known as a slope point, meaning it's a point on the side of a main peak that isn't its own summit but still has significance. For a slope point, it is actually not that difficult at all to reach. You can kind of just like carefully climb down and then go back up, and then you did it. But yeah, it is still kind of dangerous. You have to walk down this steep like rock face. Next, we have the Stevens County high point, Abercrombie Mountain, 2,000 feet and 7 miles round trip. None of the trip reports I found seem to report anything too extraordinary about this one. It seems pretty straightforward. It's this high because I can't find too much information about it, so I feel like you would just be winging it. You'd be kind of winging it. None of the sources I can find gave very reliable information on like what to do here, like what to bring. So I feel like you'd just be winging it. Next is the Cowlitz County high point, Goat Mountain. This one's also not very well documented. Not very many trip reports on this one. It apparently starts as a road walk until a mile before you reach the summit when the road just disappears and you have to walk straight up. You have to walk just straight up through this crap. It's 7 miles round trip and 3,000 feet of gain. And the bushwhack section is apparently very steep. And according to these according to this 3D model, I believe it. Next is the King County and Kittias County high point, Mount Daniel. This one is extremely popular. It's very, very, very popular. Very popular, very well documented. But it's the first one I'm mentioning that you need legit equipment for. You need crampons and you need an ice axe. However, there's so many people here. There's so many people climbing this mountain at any one time that if you do get injured, someone's going to be there to help you. Which you can't say about much of these other ones. It is still quite tough. You have to walk across glaciers and stuff, so there's always a danger to that. Next is the Yakima County high point, which is Mount Adams, which is the easiest Cascadian volcano to climb. It is the second highest point in Washington State. There is a route on this that allows you to just bypass every glacier and just walk straight up. No problem. Just a really long hill walk. I did this when I was 16, and about 1,000 feet from the summit, I started getting altitude sickness because of how high it was and how fast I was doing it. But yeah, it's just a very long, very strenuous hill walk. Not very technical at all. Less technical than Mount Daniel even. But it's very high, and it's a very it's a slog. Still the easiest volcano. Next is Mason County high point, Mount Stone. This one's similar to Mount Daniel, but it's shorter, and it's also much more isolated. There's much less people out here, and there's much less information on like methods to do this. Although there's still information on how to climb Mount Stone. It's not that unpopular, but yeah, it's a very classical mountain climb. Like you need ice axe, you need crampons, you need mountaineering gear to do this. You need to like rope up and stuff. For a mountain that you have to do that on, it could be a lot harder than this. Next is the Oreille County high point, Gypsy Peak. Highest mountain in all of eastern Washington. Its trail is considered advanced, which means that even though there's a trail here, technically, in order to like use the trail, you need a map and you need experience with going off trail because the trail is that bad. It's 7 miles round trip, about 2,600 feet of gain. But the fact that there's not really a trail, like a reliable trail, up to this makes it way harder than it really needs to. I really hope this gets a trail eventually. Next is the Skamania County high point. This one's really interesting, really weird. It is a slope on the side of Mount Adams on the border with the Yakima County. Information on how to reach this point is very sparse. There's not really much at all, like anywhere, on how to like get here. What information there is very cryptic, and it's all from 10 years ago. So I don't know how safe this is, really. Next is Whatcom County, which is Mount Baker. I did this one on July 17th, 2021. It's pretty tough. It's pretty hard. It's way easier than I was expecting. It's a pretty long slog through glaciers and stuff. And you need to rope up to do this. But for like a glacier climb, it's very non-technical. There's not very many like sketchy areas. It will take you about 2 days. Some people climb this in a day, but those people are very fit. Top performance. And I'm not in top performance, so I needed 2 days to do this. But yeah, this is Mount Baker. Tons of information. Famous mountain. Next is Okanogan. Okanogan County, North Gardner Mountain. It's a rugged peak in the North Cascades. It requires scrambling like most Cascadian peaks, like all Cascadian peaks. But this one doesn't have any permanent glaciers, and in the summer it just doesn't have any snow. So in my opinion, this makes it harder because snow allows you to kick step. You can make like a staircase in the snow as you go up, which gives you extra grip. This you're kind of just stuck using your hands, walking on scree, which I imagine wouldn't be that fun. But yeah, this takes 1 to 2 days. A lot of people do this in one, though, because it's not that far, but it is very steep and very strenuous. Next is the Skagit County high point of Mount Buckner, 9,119 feet. It's another rugged Cascadian peak, but this one has glaciers. Not as much information as Mount Baker. I imagine it would be quite a similar experience to Mount Baker, but judging from satellite imagery, there's much more exposed areas, much more just like rocky outcroppings. So I feel like this would be this one would be harder. Less information about this too. You'd be winging it, which I don't like. This is the Snohomish County high point, Glacier Peak. Probably the second hardest Washington State volcano to climb, because it's very isolated. It's a very brutal walk-in, very steep, difficult like walk into the base of the mountain. And then the mountain is it's already very for a volcano, it's very jagged and it's not very smooth at all. It's a little bit less tall than Mount Baker though. Less elevation to climb. It's only one of the hardest volcanoes due to the distance you have to walk into this. Most people do this in 3 days. Next is the Pierce County high point, which is Mount Rainier. Famous, world-renowned. I can see this from my house, but it's not the hardest. Even though it's the tallest in Washington State, it's not the hardest. I wouldn't consider this one to be the hardest. There's reliable information. There's teams that like climb this daily. You start in a parking lot. It's not the hardest in the state. It's still very, very difficult. It takes like 4 days for a lot of people. Still very hard, very steep, very tall. Very jagged glaciers. So many people die on this every year. But that's just because of how many people try to climb this every year. Next is the Clallam County high point, Bonanza Peak. This is the highest point in Washington that isn't a volcano. Bonanza Peak. It's like Mount Rainier, except just harder. Just way harder. just a lot harder, a lot more jagged, a lot more sketchy. A lot more exposed, just like rocky outcroppings. Because with Mount Rainier, you're just walking on snow the whole time. This is just like, ugh. Yeah, very rough. You need like skills to do this. You need like legit like mountain climbing skills. Bonanza Peak's really hard. Next is Jefferson County high point, Mount Olympus in the Olympic Mountains. It's only 7,000 feet, 7,900 feet, which is pretty short, pretty damn short. However, it's 30 miles to walk in. It is extremely, extremely isolated. Incredibly isolated. It is 30 miles round trip from the trailhead to back to the car. Very, very isolated. It takes most people a week to climb this one. Not only that, it has a bunch of sub-peaks. And I find a lot of trip reports of people just climbing the wrong sub-peak and just like failing to climb Mount Olympus. Which is really fail and really sad. So yeah, you have to know where you're going. So think about it. You might like end up in like the wrong valley here and you might just climb the wrong mountain. Yeah, pretty tough. Second hardest in Washington, Lewis County. This one technically doesn't have a name. Unofficially, it's called Bighorn. I've never seen a collection of trip reports for like a mountain as bleak and as negative as this. Everyone never wants to go back to this. It is pure pain and pure suffering to climb this one. Not a single report I've seen for this for Bighorn is positive at all, which is because the mountain is made up of just sand. It's made up of sand. It's just loose like gravelly sand, and your foot just sinks in every time. It's like walking in quicksand. Just the whole way up. Just for the whole way up to the very top of the mountain. And the worst part is that at the very top, at the very, very peak, to reach the true summit, there is a boulder. It's a 10-foot tall boulder with no handholds. And you have to do class 5 maneuvers with ropes and stuff to get to the top. A lot of people get to the top, see the boulder, which houses the true summit, and fail because they can't. They just don't have the skills to climb the class 5 summit, which is really awful. This is widely considered one of the toughest county high points outside of Alaska, just in the United States. The only easy thing about this is that it has like documentation, because people know about like how brutal this is. It's documented. People like know how to do this. It's just like some people just can't because they don't have the skills. All right. This is the hardest county high point in Washington state. The Grays Harbor County High Point. I'm going to break this down real quick. All right. So even driving up this is really hard and inconsistent. Even driving to the base of the point. The most recent trip report for this mountain trail is from 2017. This means I don't know if it's passable right now or not. And in 2017, apparently 2 miles below, it's just impassable to cars. It's just landslides and down trees because no one ever drives up here. No one ever takes their car up here. There's no reason. There's no major peaks around here or anything. There's nothing. It's just like hills. Just boring hills. So nobody goes up here. Anyways, this point right here is where you start. You see how this kind of looks like a trail? It's not a trail. There's no trail that actually leads up to the point. You know what this means? You have to walk straight up this for 2 miles straight. No trail, nothing. According to the trip reports, the few trip reports, most of the trip reports are from 10 years ago, by the way. They're almost all from a decade ago, and they're all pretty vague. But they all tell of climbing straight up a hill in the forest through brambles and sticker bushes and devil's club. Just really hilariously bad conditions. Just straight up this hill. And once you get to the top, the funniest part is it's not right here. It's not this. It's a cliff on the side because it's on the border with Jefferson County. So it's just this cliff on the side of the hill. Very dangerous. You could die very easily. No one ever comes up here. If you fall, you're dead, and no one's ever going to know what happened. Yeah, it's very dangerous, no documentation, horrible conditions, just devil's club and sticker bushes just straight up a hill with no trail, and then to top it all off, the point isn't a point, it's a cliff face, and you have to climb on the cliff face. The best time to do this is in the winter after it snowed, because then the devil's club and the brambles will be covered up by snow. Other than that, there is no helping you on this. That's the only way to make this easier.